I would like to remind everyone that we have some books for sale, the research conducted by IMANI on various topics. So if you like any of them, you can walk up to the table and get yourself a copy. We would also like to acknowledge amongst us the MP for Chereponi. If he can give us a wave. All right, he's duly acknowledged. We'd also like to acknowledge the paramount chief of Akpafu traditional area, Nana Kofi Edu II. If he can also give us a wave. You're very welcome, sir. So without talking too much, we'd like to zoom into the next section, which I believe will be very interesting because it deals with financing, which we've all been talking about so far. I would call on our head of research, Patrick Stevenson, to take over this session. Thank you.
Today, you look across the continent, you find the Chinese are doing stuff here and there. You know, you have the Europeans and the Americans who have been doing stuff here and there. Your private capital that equally does stuff. And it's also an open secret that, you know, savings in Africa is extremely poor, is extremely low. What it means is that the volume of money that we need to invest in some of these nice things we like to have is typically not there. And so the money and the numbers is extremely important. And to help me have that conversation will be individuals who work in that particular space, experiences from Ghana and Morocco as well. And I'm sure all of us will be able to contribute to the conversation as it evolves. Without much ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Ishmael Ejekumhene. He's the Executive Director of the Kumasi Institute of Technology, Environment and Energy. Please, a round of applause for him. And we have the Deputy Energy Minister, if he's here. The Deputy Energy Minister in the person of Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. Is he here? He's not here. Okay, he's on his way. He'll definitely catch us as the conversation evolves. And we have a representative from the Moroccan delegation in the person of Larabi Jaidi. He's a senior fellow at the OCP Policy Center. If you can also join us here so we can start the conversation. Okay, so we understand we would have to, like you have substitutions in football, right? Our colleague from the OCP Center and the person of Larabi Jaidi is not here, so we'll have Mr. Francis, who's also with the Moroccan delegation, to join us here so we can start the conversation. So who pays for all the nice things that we have talked about earlier? Access, renewable energy, who's paying for mini grid, large grid, and all this conversation. So we'll start off by picking the thoughts of the panelists we have regarding what the current state of financing of energy infrastructure and its access across the African continent looks like. Not too long ago, I think about 3-4 months ago, the African Development Bank President, Mr. Adesina, was somewhere in South Africa and he was quoting some very interesting numbers regarding energy infrastructure investments in Africa, talking about something in the region of $170 billion. $170 billion, I counted in my head the number of African economies that have to be consolidated in terms of their GDP to be able to raise that money and then invest in infrastructure. And then he subsequently put some of those numbers annually between 82 to $112 billion. I'm not particularly sure again which economies have to be collapsed to be able to raise that money. I know that in our own case, our GDP, we are nowhere near $100 billion. So I'll start with you, Mr. Ejekumhene. What's the map of financing of energy infrastructure in Africa at the moment? If we can look at it from the Ghanaian case, that will be superb. The map of financing for energy infrastructure across the African continent today.
Well, I think let's backtrack a bit and look at the historical context. Then we'll be able to get to the present. Previously, in many parts of the developing world, energy infrastructure has tended to be funded through largely grants and concessionary loans, where developing countries will just either be given a grant or they'll go and borrow at 0.7% with 10 years moratorium, and then you pay the rest of the loan over 40 years. That's how we built our own Akosombo Dam, for example, and the energy infrastructure we have, the bulk of the infrastructure from grid, the transmission network through distribution network, they've all been developed through concessionary credits. But that source of funding started dwindling very, very fast, and it became clear that we couldn't continue to rely. And here, the problem is not just Ghana, the whole of Africa, and in fact, the developing world. So it began to dawn and to sink in that the concessionary credits and grants were no longer going to be available. So we look for alternative. Either you raise the money yourself through the public sector, trying to build your own energy infrastructure, or then you have to resort to private capital. That's what led to the energy sector reforms that took place all over the world. Create the market, create the environment so that the private capital will come in. So predominantly in Africa, even in Southeast Asia, in most part of the developing world, it used to be concessionary grants and credits. Now it's no longer the case, and a lot of private sector participation is taking place. And that also changes the dynamics, because the private sector is not here as a tourist. The private capital, they expect good returns on their money, and that also brings into question whether there is a real market to be able to pay back what the private man is looking for. Lately, there is a donor on the block that everybody seems to be going to, and that's the Chinese, because you get a form of what looks like a credit on good terms, but we all know they are also not here as tourists. They have their own national interest, and they have their own private interest as well. So yes, the energy sector financing has been a problem for years, and now it's moving more into private sector participation, and we need to be able to create the markets for the private sector to come, because I have learned, and I was told only last week, that money is not a problem for the sector, even with the renewables. It is having a bankable project, and having a project that the financiers will look at it and say, I am interested in this project because I'm guaranteed X return if I commit my private capital to that. The era of free money, unfortunately, it's over. If we look at the energy investment needs that we require in Africa, for example, it's projected that we need close to about $55 billion each year for the next 15 years to be able to get the kind of infrastructure we need to improve upon access. If we don't do that, and this is incremental investment of 50 billion every year, like you were saying, where are we going to get the money from? If we need to be able to rely on our taxes, we're not going to be able to do that. The private sector is willing to help, but they are not coming here to give us money. They are interested in business, and they are looking for returns on their investments.
Well, thank you very much. But before you put the mic down, so you made a point, which is that we have to find a way of creating, well, for the want of a better phrase, politicians would typically say an enabling environment for private capital to find its rightful place to support investment. How do we do that?
How we do that?
How do we create that environment?
Okay, so you come in and you provide, assuming you build infrastructure, you either handing over to the public sector to run it, or you run it and you're providing a service. You expect to be paid some money, okay, in terms of the tariff and things like that. How you do that, basically you need the legislative and also the policy and regulatory framework to say that in Ghana, we have opened the space for private sector to come in. So you could either get into generation, which is what has happened over the years, where we have a lot of IPPs. In fact, the first IPP came in as early as the 1997. Okay, so the Tigo plant is an IPP with which actually is the first thermal IPP that we have in this country. The signal has to be sent out there. That was what led Ghana into starting this power sector reform. In fact, the reform was birthed as a result of negotiations for the money to build the thermal plants in the first place. So if you're not going to get a World Bank grant, if the private sector is coming in, then there has to be what we call an open access to your transmission network so that somebody can generate and put it in there. You need to let people understand that when the power is produced and sold, you'll be able to get your money back. What is happening here right now is that people come, and even when they have IPPs, they still are not confident to go out there and raise funds and build a project. They're still looking for government guarantees, okay? Because they need government to put in money and say that if ECG or NETCO or whoever is the off-taker is unable to pay, I need a guarantee. So car power, there is a guarantee. Everybody needs a guarantee. Now the government said, I'm talking here about Ghana, saying that we're not going to offer guarantees, and that's how come most of the IPPs, renewable energy IPPs, never got built. Now they have what they call PCOA, push call option agreement. That's what they're offering, which is another form of guarantee, but it's not like sovereign guarantee. So you need to let the private sector know that there is opportunity for them to come in. For example, in the off-grid market, where the government itself know that they can't do everything. They need to let the private sector understand that you could go in there and provide service and you get your money back. Okay, but once again, we have a policy in this country that says there's universal tariff, uniform tariff. So even if you produce a kilowatt of electricity on the Volta Lake, it's the same as me sitting in Accra. That's the policy. And that still takes us to where we're able to subsidies and making sure that the private sector recovers their money. So yes, you need to open up the sector and send the right signal. But the private sector will look at so many other things before they will put their money in there, including guarantees. If we don't do that, they will come, you go and talk to all these IPPs who got their licenses, but they were never able to build. They will come in, but they will not be able to implement the project. Bottom line, they need to recover their investment, they need to make returns on their investment, and the only signal they're looking for is that, will I be able to get my money back? Will I be able to get some returns on the money because I have alternative uses for the money?
Thank you very much for those submissions. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Francis Perrine, and this specifically is to pick up your thoughts on the Moroccan experience, and indeed any other country you've seen in Africa that has been able to navigate some of the constraints that Mr. Jekum touches on. We know Morocco fairly is advanced in terms of its energy market. Infrastructure. It's quite advanced as well when it comes to financing. It has some of the largest banks we currently have on the African continent. And if you look at energy access, somewhat it is almost distributed across the African continent as the sort of finance infrastructure that we even have across Africa. So what really is giving Morocco and other countries where capital appears to be a bit, for the want of a better phrase, to be a bit more available to support investments in infrastructure for energy?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. As we know well in this distinguished audience, energy is often a very capital-intensive sector. And so the issue of financing is very often a crucial one. Of course, for renewable energies, but more generally speaking. Of course, in the energy field, you have activities which are normally very profitable. If we are looking at upstream oil and gas, for instance, it's normally a very interesting business. It depends on the level of oil prices. Obviously, if oil prices are higher than $100 per barrel or under $30 per barrel, to refer to two examples within the 2014-2016 recent period, it's very different. But today, with Brent prices at about $80 per barrel or little more, clearly upstream oil and gas is very interesting. and you have the role of private actors, especially the international oil companies and national oil companies too. But it's not the case of any energy activities, clearly, including energy access and the building of the required infrastructure. State-controlled companies are often short of cash, and so we really need to find the ways and means to attract private investment, especially, but not only in Africa. In order to attract private investment, you need several key issues. You need, of course, political stability, you need security, you need legal clarity, visibility, and certainty, and you need profitability. And it's up, of course, to the states and the public agencies to contribute to set up this type of environment which will be conducive to private investment in the different aspects of the energy sector. We have also to take into account the international financial institutions and the potential of regional and international cooperation. China, of course, was quoted, and other countries, including Western countries, even if some of them are not really fond to invest or to help invest into energy infrastructure. Clearly, there is creativity work which is already underway, fortunately, but which must be deepened in order to find new sources and new ways and means to finance energy infrastructure and access, especially on the African continent. As said previously by different speakers, within the first roundtable and within the audience, market creation is key. Clearly, there is here a potential virtuous circle with a growing demand, a growing supply, and reduction of costs, which is a key in order to attract private investment in the African continent, especially but not only in the renewable energies as discussed during our previous and very interesting first roundtable. So, as far as Morocco is concerned, there was very important work in terms of legislation. In order to create this conducive environment, it's very important to be able to attract the private investors and to give them guarantees in terms of offtake, in terms of payment. And there was very important work and very positive work conducted by the Moroccan authorities, Ministry of Energy, of course, public agencies specialized on renewable energies and energy saving. There were several years of very interesting legislative and work, and of course regulatory work, in order to contribute to set up this conducive investment climate. It's one of the key issues for the whole of the Africa continent, and more broadly for developing and emerging countries, or at least several of them. And I am sure that we will have the opportunity during this roundtable and the discussion which will follow it to deepen some of the perspectives and aspects and ideas. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for those submissions. Again, before you also put the microphone down. So you heard earlier Mr. Jakumbene, who had mentioned that you have IPPs who are supposed to be providing alternative, if you like, power generation mechanisms for the country Ghana. He talks about creating an enabling market environment. He again touched on the fact that, well, you have a policy directive which says that power is supposed to be sold at a particular price across board. So irrespective of where you're generating that power from, clearly you are going to be constrained if your sources are different in terms of what you effectively charge. What is the Moroccan experience on that particular policy proposition? What we're doing, which is to get a universal price at which power is sold. which clearly is hindering the ability of independent power producers to raise sufficient capital to support the investments in the project. What is the Moroccan experience in that area?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Clearly, IPPs are a key instrument as far as the issues we are dealing with are concerned. We also spoke about power purchase agreements, which are very important, and of course, public and private partnerships. These are three key elements of the energy strategies we have to put in place tomorrow and in the coming and near-term and mid-term and long-term future. As always, as our English friends would say, the devil is in the details. And of course, it's not enough to speak about some broad formulas, which are very important, which are key. We are to be very attentive in terms of the details of the agreements, the good negotiations, the capacity to negotiate good agreements for the interest, the national interest of the country concerned. And it's key in terms of capacity building as far as the management of human resources is concerned, a key issue obviously concerning the energy sector, including of course renewable energies. So there was a very important work done in Morocco on this count, and we have to elsewhere in Africa to contribute to build these capacities. And here, regional cooperation, regional integration, which will be dealt with in the next roundtable about as far as oil and gas are concerned. But regional cooperation, regional integration are here very important aspects to develop, because not every country, not any country will have alone the capacity to build the required capacities in order to negotiate and to put into practice such key agreements for the renewable sectors and more generally the energy sector, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do is to give you, the audience, as much time to ask questions to the panelists as much as you can, because the issue of financing, I'm not sure we can have all the conversation at the table. So at this point, if you have a question, not comments, if you have specific questions on the conversation as it's evolving, towards the end, we'll open the floor as well for comments on the conversation as we evolve. But if you have specific questions, I'll be able to take those questions as the conversation evolves. If I don't see any hand on the floor, then I'll take the lead and continue with my inquisition here. Okay, there's a hand over there.
Yeah, Mr. Yakumihin, I want to know, maybe from where you sit, the other portfolio that has not been mentioned, probably, if you can tell us.
Can you not remove his cloak, please?
Okay, so what is the reasoning behind taking away the sovereign guarantee for IPPs? For instance, I will look at a market like South Africa, okay? They have gone through a series of REIPP, the auction program that we mentioned earlier on. And I think they are in their fourth, okay. And still they have guarantees for projects. Don't you think that guarantees rather are a way to beat down pricing for IPPs, giving assurances that your project is secured, so your risk is covered to some extent? Then developers can say, okay, because of that, we are just sitting on the line. But if you realize that I'm coming into a market where it's almost like all the risk is on me, then okay, why don't I charge something like 18, 20, recoup everything in 10 years? Because I don't know, MPP will be gone or the government will be gone, the next government will not come and say, let me look into the project again, but then I've cleared everything. What would you say is the reasoning for taking away the sovereign guarantee?
Okay, so I'm not sure I know why it's taken away, because I think it was a cabinet decision, and I'm obviously not a cabinet minister. But I think I can hazard not a guess, but educated guess. I believe it's two main. It has to do with two main reasons. One is the excess capacity thing that we all saddle with. So, for example, if you have take-or-pay contracts that you actually renegotiating with people, a guarantee basically says that I'm signing an undertaking that when you produce the power, I guarantee that somebody pays. Okay, so when you have a situation where you have developers waiting and they having to even reschedule the development of the IPPs who have power purchase agreements, you don't want to saddle yourself with more guarantees. So I believe that's one of the main reasons, because if you have a peak demand which is hovering around 2,200 megawatt as we speak right now, and you have total installed capacity of about 4,200 megawatts, and you don't have the luxury of saying that I'm going to make use of the West African power pool because the power is expensive, then you wouldn't want to do that. In the heat of the energy crisis, they provided guarantees to the Marys and to the car power. That time they have capacity constraints and they would have done everything. So those who managed to get their PPAs at the time, I believe they managed to obtain those guarantees. The situation is slightly different. And I believe that's the reason why they're not getting that. The other one is to say that it has to do, I believe, with the private sector participation in the distribution sector. Previously, ECG was the main off-taker, signing all the PPAs. It was a public sector institution. From January 1, 2019, it's going to be run by a private sector, and I believe government cannot sign undertaking on behalf of Merako, for example, because they have the concession to run the distribution utility for God knows how many years more to come. So I believe the dynamics change significantly, and that's part of the reason why I believe Energy Commission even put out those notice yesterday in the Daily Graphic that no more wholesale licenses to be issued. Unfortunately for renewables, just as the time the momentum was picking up, because the energy crisis actually made people people really started understanding energy. So anybody could sit back and say, look, I'm spending X amount on the grid, so now I'm even going to switch over to my gensets. People were making decisions in terms of where they want to source their power from. So then there was this craze for all this net metering that ECG never allowed to fully take place. Now people are very much aware and they are awakening as to the options they have. So I agree with what, I've forgotten his name, what Nyanta said. I mean, everybody's looking at grid connected systems and everybody's looking at government for guarantees. But the captive power market is still very ripe, and once you're able to identify a bulk consumer and you're able to tell them that you can provide power lower than what they're getting from the grid, you are in business. So I consider that would be two answers that I believe contributed to that decision. When you are faced with excess capacity and you needed to renegotiate, some PPAs had to be cancelled, some had to be delayed. And close to about, we were told that the ones that were canceled and renegotiated was close to about 600 or so billion US dollars, because most of them were take-or-pay contract. As we speak right now, some of these plants are not being dispatched, and capacity charges have kicked in long ago. So that must be the reason, but maybe the ministry people would have been the best people to tell us.
So I have a follow-up to that. So are you suggesting that the private players whom you would expect to be playing in that captive power space or providing the alternative sources of non-grid power, if you can call them that, are you suggesting that they don't have a full appreciation of what the Ghanaian or the African market looks like to be able to exploit these other avenues rather than depending on sovereign guarantees from government?
They do, but that's more, it's a bilateral arrangements that you're going to have with. So for example, if I am an IPP and I can go to the mines and convince them that, look, I can meet 50% of your power needs. And if you're getting it from ECG or from VRA at X, I can deliver power at, let's say, Y. Immediately you start getting people turning over to you. Okay, so they are aware, but there are still not too many of them around. And then the moment the regular suppliers realize that their market is being undercut, I know ECG is actually selling power to some people below what the PRC has approved because they're losing their market. Okay, so you also have to compete with a big player like VRA. You know, VRA in some cases supply power directly to the mines. So you have a challenge there. But for these bulk consumers, if you are not looking at grid connected system, you are not looking at net metering, and you want to say that I'm going to produce 50% of my own power from renewables, you don't actually need a license if you are not connecting to your grid. If it's a captive power, you can do it. Okay, that's what the market is scared of, and that's part of the reason why the net metering was even put on hold, because suddenly ECG realized that they were going to lose market share. The more people get onto this captive power. And in fact, as we speak right now, there are certain businesses who, as soon as they realize that they are hitting a certain consumption threshold, will stop using the grid and switch on to their gen sets. I mean, several hotels during the peak hours are actually switching over. There are some hotels who are actually running on their gen set because when they do the math, it's cheaper that way. So the captive market, I believe, is more likely if you are not looking for guarantees. So it's a bilateral arrangement you enter into with whoever is going to buy power. There's no role for the government in there once you're able to go in there and do it. That would be my take. Another thing that never got off the table, which would have been useful, and I don't know the future of it now, is the Renewable Energy Purchase Obligation, which actually is in the Renewable Energy Act and imposes an obligation on certain category of producers of electricity to have a certain amount of their generation in renewables. It's been in the law since 2011, it never kicked in. There were some frameworks, guidelines that had been produced, but it never kicked in. I think once it kicks in, then the market for renewable IPP becomes a little bit more interesting. But I think that the risk, as we see, and the reason why several IPPs have actually, they haven't been able to develop their project, even though they have PPAs, and they really should have, is that they were looking for more security, more guarantee, and it's because they couldn't trust the off-taker.
I have a follow-up, but I'll come to that a little later in the conversation. Mr. Francis Payne, so from what I'm hearing, there's sufficient potential that can be explored. We all agree. Some people will prefer to do a guarantee from government to cover them up, to the community start and all of those factors. My question is finance in Africa not recognizing this potential so that they will create products that support the sort of fine things we are talking about now? Because somebody understands that, yeah, there's captive power somewhere, I have the business model, it makes sense, I can go and get a bank to bankroll that particular product. I mean, are the banks and other finance institutions in Africa not recognizing that to be able to move finance to support some of these fine ideas we have?
Thank you very much. Clearly, as of today, sovereign guarantees are very often searched for. And clearly, behind this issue, there is a question of trust. We must not hide this aspect of our discussion and the perception of a certain reality. As we know in life, reality is less important than the perception than some key actors have of the situation on the African continent. So it will be part of the landscape for some time yet. It is clear that we have here work to do. I would like to say some education work, including as far as the finance sector is concerned. There is a creativity work, there is an education work, there is a trust to be built over time. It will not, of course, happen in the next few days or the next few months, but it's important to try to build this virtuous circle with a good legislation and regulation at a national level, the beginning of the creation of new energy demand, the reduction of costs, and to try to use this virtuous circle in order to attract foreign investment and to also seize the attention of the financing community in order for them to be more creative, especially as far as renewable energies are concerned. But we have a lot of we are not very far down the road as far as these financing issues are concerned, even if you have some national examples showing that a way is open as far as this issue is concerned. Thank you.
So I'm going to come back to you. Any questions, comments on the conversation? So okay, so there's a hand. Anissa, there's a hand over here. There's another. Okay. So we'll take you. We'll come back here, and then we'll go back to the first row in the center.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Zahid from Biotherm Energy. Our company is a renewable energy wind and solar developer under the IPP basis. I think the first point is when a project is financed on an IPP basis, there's private sector money and there's funding from development finance institutions like IFC, AFDB, Proparco, FMO. And it's not only the private sector that needs these guarantees, it's these development finance institutions that actually put a lot more onerous requirements than the private sector. So I think it's important to know that it's not just the private sector that's after the guarantee, but the debt funders who put up probably 70 to 80% of the project cost that are seeking these guarantees in order for the project to be developed further. Then on the point regarding the sort of captive market or private PPAs, yes, we are looking into those opportunities in country. However, at the same time, there needs to be legislation that allows for it. So, you know, if you want to be a private seller of electricity, the law needs to allow for it. And I'm not too sure whether that actually is possible in Ghana at the moment.
But say, no, don't bring the mic. I'll come back to you to react to him. So how have you, as a private pod producer, how have you navigated that? The constraint regarding the request for guarantees by DFIs, the development finance institutions?
So I think for our projects in South Africa, they are provided. We're developing projects in Burkina, and there's ongoing discussions with the authorities there. It is always generally a pushback, but no development finance institution is going to borrow you the money without that, and they've made it quite clear to us. So even the Africa Development Bank will say to you, you need a government guarantee. And if you were to do a project on a large scale for a mine, you are also going to ask the mine to put up some sort of guarantee for your power that you are going to sell to them. So it's not just that we look for guarantees from government. If you're doing a large scale project with a mine or private off-taker, you are going to ask for a guarantee as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gumini.
Okay, so let me issue this disclaimer before I get myself into trouble. One, I don't represent the Energy Commission. Two, I am not your typical finance person, okay? So, but I think the point that I was trying to make is there's a reason why government is moving away from the guarantees. And you are not a Ghanaian, but there's a saying in Ghana that when the animal is caught in a trap, the way it cries is different from when it's free, okay? So literally saying that when we were in crisis, a lot of people got away with all sorts of deals and with all sorts of guarantees. I remember car power wouldn't come in until some $100 million was put coolly in some account before even the power badge came in. We were in crisis. Okay. At the moment, there is another option. I don't know whether that is not too interesting. The PCOA, the push call option agreement, which is also a form of government guarantee, but it's not as secured as a sovereign guarantee. Okay. So I think this challenge that we have on our hands, for me, it's a bit of a short-term challenge. Very soon, I anticipate that what we're seeing as excess capacity could so easily be eaten up. I mean, we have a lot of suppressed demand in this country that if you begin to unlock that potential, if VACO alone were to run all its 6 port lines, that's cool 300 megawatts. Okay, that can very easily take up 1 IPP. So if industrialization, as envisaged, should kick in the way it's expected, we wouldn't be talking about excess capacity within the next 3 to 4 years. Okay, so that's something that we need to be keeping our eye on and making sure that we monitor the system. There is definitely a suppressed demand that needs to be met. But you asked whether the private people are allowed to sell power. Yes, you're allowed to sell power to licensed bulk consumers. And there's a definition. Those people would have had to, who have been licensed by the Energy Commission, that we are bulk consumers. And the threshold, I think, is you need to consume something like 2,000 gigawatts or something hours in a year. Okay, and then there's also some threshold based on your total demand. So once that entity is licensed, you are allowed to sell power to them directly without going to the PURC. So you can check with the Energy Commission. They do have the list of these bulk consumers of power, and you can talk to them. I understand there are challenges, but again, if you had come in the era of the crisis, a lot more people will be chasing you than you chasing them at the moment. But I believe the challenges are going to be, they are quite short term. And I can foresee the power market opening up in maximum 4 to 5 years' time, when the so-called excess capacity would have been eaten up. Most of these thermal plants are old anyway. Some of them are going to be derated shortly. So we need to be looking at the space closely. The renewables, we need to push the government to stick to its 10% target and get the government to define it properly. 10% of what? And is it based on what are they going to calculate the 10%? Those who give clear policy signals as to exactly where we want to go. And one more thing, I think there's also the need to have a clear policy on the off-grid market. It has to be properly defined, delineated clearly, so that you wouldn't go and do a project in the village and the next time the national grid is there and you don't have any business. Okay, that has to be earmarked properly, and there's a clear no-go area for the grid, and then you'll be able to plan and go and structure, because at the moment in the off-grid market you don't need any tariff from PURC before you go in there. So that's something that we need to be keeping an eye on.
I don't think we want to be building business models around when we are in crisis. I know businessmen typically, and financiers in particular for that matter, who want to exploit you when you are in need. So we don't want to do that. There was a hand here. Can we take that question?
Okay, thank you. I was basically going to also ask about why we are not exploring the financing guarantee from the development financing institutions. For example, as you mentioned, IFC, because most private sector players in the EMP are even going there. However, they may not give you the capital or the funding that you need, not even a quarter. However, you gain the credibility and the trust to be able to access capital from the global market. And so, are these IPPs not exploring that options? And if you know, why not are they not doing that?
You see, they will tell you the problem is not money. There is a lot of money out there, but anybody who wants to give you your money would want to be sure the money will come back. So the question is, who is your off-taker? You can get IFC, you can get all these private banks, development finance institutions to give you money. They would, once you show them that the money will be, you'll be able to do business out of the money. And basically, if it's power, they want to see what we call the power purchase agreement, and whether whoever has signed that PPA is able to pay you when you need your money. So the problem has never been money, because these developers, they will tell you they can get credit. It's only Ghanaian IPPs. If you want to borrow money from Ghana, Ghanaian banks, you won't get many people to give you money, or you can't borrow and do any project in energy at 35% or 25%. That, I mean, you can't do any business like that. So for the development finance, yes, they are. That's why he said the IFCs are the ones who are even asking for the guarantees. You understand? So I'll give you the money on condition that you demonstrate to me that when it's time for you to come and pay, you won't come and tell me that ECG or NETCO is refusing to pay you. So that's why they need a government guarantee.
So we hear you. I know there's a hand here. I've been notified that we're practically out of time, but I don't know how you calculated our time, because when you told us we have 10 minutes, it was 12:03, and now it's 12:07 by my clock. So I still have some 3 minutes, please. Mr. Perry, so I'm going to ask a question and then go here and then we'll round up. So we are having a conversation now around sovereign guarantees and how that can help, you know, the private developers unlock money to support their investment. I know you are not a DFI, but how do we convince the DFIs? I mean, not as Ghana alone, but as an entire energy market. How do we convince DFIs to shift the thinking away from saying they need, you know, the sovereign guarantee has got to be a precursor? How do you do that?
Thank you very much. I think you are right, Mr. Chairman, and I will take back your formulas. Sovereign guarantees unlock money. It's part of the game, and it will remain part of the game for a certain time. I would not, of course, dare to say how many years, and perhaps decades, but it's clearly the framework in which investors and industries, companies, states must work. We spoke in the previous question about project finance, and the person who asked the question on the basis of his own experience clearly stressed that under the framework of project finance too, this type of guarantees are very sought after for obvious reasons. The gentleman referred to international financial institutions, to development banks. He made a reference to the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, which is part of the World Bank Group. We are in this landscape, and as you said, Mr. Chairman, we have to find ways and means to shift this mindset. But it does not mean that it will happen in the next few years or in the next several years. So we will have to take into account the present framework and on a progressive basis try to, with a dialogue with the financial community, with different actors in terms of finance, we will have to find, with the governments also concerned, to find the ways to make them evolve over time. But as far as we are concerned, now clearly we have to take into this requirement for sovereign guarantees in this field. Thank you.
So I want you both to be thinking in your final comments. So if they are not prepared to consider sovereign guarantees, what is the Asian market giving us in terms of an alternative for financing energy investment? But let me take this question, the last final question, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you very much. I want to ask, so we are seeing that it's very difficult for IPPs to get sovereign guarantees from their various nations. Would it be far-fetched if IPPs consider some kind of partnership based on, let's say, project-specific partnership? So you have 2 or 3 IPPs partnering to execute certain projects. Is it going to increase their likelihood to attract credit from these DFIs or these IFIs?
Well, thank you very much.
Well, partnership wouldn't really help. You are going to deliver a product and somebody will have to say that I guarantee that I will buy and pay you. So when you partner, well, maybe you need less capital from maybe the DFIs. But the challenge here, the reason why they need sovereign guarantee is that I want to be sure that you'll be able to collect the money from whoever is signing the undertaking. So it wouldn't help unless, of course, you pull in private equity amongst yourselves. So you probably wouldn't need to go in for debt. But I think it isn't as if there is no guarantee. The PCOA, it's also a form of guarantee. It might not be as sexy as the sovereign guarantee, which is almost like saying that the government of Ghana, the president is saying that go and do the business, I'll pay you. Again, I see this as a temporary something. Very soon, if this economy opens up, what we're seeing as excess capacity can very easily disappear. We also have the West African power pool, that if we're able to get cheaper generation, we'll be able to really even sell power into the power pool. The Burkinas and the Senegals are still, their unit cost is still higher than the way we produce power here. If we're able to get a lot of cheaper options into the generation mix, we may be able to explore the power pool market. But at the moment, I think the biggest challenge is the excess capacity and the take-or-pay contracts that runs into billions of cedis and dollars every year for plants that are virtually sitting down idle and not generating.
Okay, I know I was asking a question about the Asian market, but I don't know if Mr. Perrin wants to touch on that, and then we'll bring the session to a close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My neighbor has just stressed a very important point: excess capacities. Clearly, they are never guaranteed. We must have sufficient investment in order to keep them, to maintain them, to develop them. And of course, we go back to the question of financing. As far as Ghana is concerned and gas is concerned, the country is now in a situation where it will have a gas surplus. And this gas comes from several contracts with take-or-pay obligations. It's not an easy way for the state here, the Ministry of Energy, the authorities, to try to find their way out of such a situation. As you have take-or-pay obligations, it means that, as you know well in this audience, either you take the gas, or even if you do not take the gas, you pay. So there is some margin for maneuver in terms of negotiations in order to try to, in some case, to defer the beginning of such obligations, but it will not be easy. There will be a price to pay in order to defer or to cancel some obligations. So clearly this double issue of capacities, excess capacities, take-or-pay contracts, and the long-term, mid-term and long-term energy security for a developing country such as Ghana and other African countries is also a key issue. We don't have the time now at the end of this roundtable to deepen it, but it was important that we at least mentioned it for the follow-up of our work and our thinking on these key issues.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ishmael Ejekumhene and Mr. Francis Perry. A round of applause for them. Well, I'm sure we have all noted the key points from the conversation. I was particularly looking to hear, well, Chinese money is coming in. Maybe that's going to erode a bit of the demand for guarantees, etc., etc. But of course, that equally has its implications. But it's been a very fruitful conversation, and we hope that some of the decision pointers that have come up are things we'll follow up, either to further look into them by way of research projects, or think through what we can collectively do to ensure that we get enough financing to support the infrastructure development in terms of energy and its access in Africa. Thank you so much for your time.